Hey guys, today we are talking about the Wizard of Oz theme park. Which one? Oh, exactly. Buckle up, friends, because we've got a cyclone of stuff to talk about. Welcome to Teacup for One. My name is Matt and I have 2 degrees. Okay, friends, if you know me, you know that my 2 favorite things in this world, tied with Disney, Shakespeare, cats, and Funko Pops, are theme parks and the Wizard of Oz. And if you follow Wizard of Oz theme park news, and I mean, let's be honest, who doesn't? You no doubt know that we recently got a surprise announcement that nobody was asking for, but everybody was so grateful for. We are, for the first time ever, getting a theme park land dedicated to the 1939 MGM Wizard of Oz film. We're getting a Wizard of Oz theme park land. But you know what? I'll take what I can get. If we can't get an entire theme park, I'm happy to just get a land. Now, this dedicated Wizard of Oz theme park land is going to be in addition to the Warner Brothers movie world in Australia. Australia, a little bit far, but also perfect for Wizard of Oz for Oz-related reasons that I'll get into later. But I cannot stress how excited I was when I saw this announcement. Because as a Wizard of Oz enthusiast and as a theme park enthusiast, I have been waiting for a Wizard of Oz theme park almost my entire life. And not just because I thought it was a cool idea, but because back when I was a youngster and back when the internet was relatively new, Google wasn't even a thing back then. I was like internet searching and I came upon an announcement for an epic Wizard of Oz theme park. Like a Disney World level Wizard of Oz theme park. I kid you not. There were concept drawings. There was like a location. I think there might have even been a tentative opening date. I had this whole plan fabricated to convince my parents to take me to Kansas for this bleeping theme park. But then, actually, no, you know what? I'm getting ahead of myself. Because the Wizard of Oz and theme parks, that's a very long and complicated relationship. It has been a long and winding yellow brick road to get to this announcement. There is such a complicated history when it comes to the Wizard of Oz and theme park projects. I mean, for over 70 years, there have been multiple attempts to integrate the Wizard of Oz into some kind of themed attraction. Some projects either never got off the ground, and those that did pretty well came to an all too soon end. So today, we are looking at the history of Wizard of Oz theme parks. The stuff that worked, the stuff that didn't work, and the stuff that would have been bleeping amazing if it wasn't for Midwestern politicians. This is the Oz that almost was. The Oz that almost was. Whatever. Now, it's probably no surprise that the first attempt at a Wizard of Oz theme park attraction came from the king himself, Walt Disney. But Walt Disney, both the man and the company, had a very long and complicated relationship with the Wizard of Oz. Now, I know it's hard to imagine a time before the 1939 Wizard of Oz film from MGM, but just try. L Frank Baum's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, was first published in 1900, which meant that Walt Disney would have been among the first generation of kids to grow up with the story. Plus, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz is widely accepted as being the first ever American fairy tale. So, I mean, just imagine that you're Walt for a second. You have childhood nostalgia, you have fairy tales, and you have classic down-home Americana. To Walt Disney, all of that together, that was like cheese to a mouse. Walt always planned to adapt The Wizard of Oz into a feature-length film, and there are reports that his hope was to have The Wizard of Oz be his next full-length animated feature after Snow White. But here's the thing, in him trying to get Snow White just to happen, he was too slow to secure the rights to The Wizard of Oz, which meant that MGM got the rights to The Wizard of Oz, and MGM made their Wizard of Oz movie, and we all know how that went. However, a few years later, the rights became available for all of L Frank Baum's other Oz books, and Walt snatched those up, which meant he suddenly had the ability to create any project he wanted utilizing the characters from the world of Oz, except he couldn't do anything with the origin story. So, Walt began development on a project which was set to star almost all of the Mouseketeers, and it was going to be about Dorothy having to return to Oz to somehow help the Cowardly Lion, who was under a spell and he'd become evil and a corrupt ruler or some such nonsense. The project was called Rainbow Road to Oz, but in my mind, I like to think of it as Rainbow Road to Hell, because seriously, what the bleep is this?
Patches, patches, Pick some pretty patches, put the pretty patches in a patchwork quilt.
Oh God, kill it with fire. Now, for better or worse, but let's be honest, 100% for better, the project was cancelled and didn't go any further than those couple of production numbers that they aired as previews for the Disneyland TV show. Now, all of the time, money, resources, and actors that were going to go into the Wizard of Oz project ended up being used to produce Disney's Babes in Toyland. So if you want any idea of what a Disney Oz project could have looked like, just watch Babes in Toyland. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Matt, I came here for theme park history, not movie history. Well, Bloom, just hold your horses of differing colors, because context here is pretty darn important. Because after Rainbow Road to Hell was cancelled, Walt decided that he still wanted to use the Oz property in some way, and so plans went into development to include an Oz attraction as part of Disneyland's first expansion. The attraction was going to be called Rock Candy Mountain. It was going to be a transparent mountain that looked like it was made of rock candy. Now, their plan was to extend the tracks and the ride paths for both the Casey Jr. Circus train as well as the Storybook Canal attraction. And both the train and the Storybook Canal would go in and around the mountain where guests would get to see different scenes and characters from The Wizard of Oz, with the through line being that all of the characters were preparing for a birthday party for Dorothy. And the grand finale of the ride was actually attending Dorothy's surprise party. I don't think that's in any of the books. Imagineer Joe Rinaldi created models for dozens of characters, there were blueprints, concept art pieces done, but then abruptly, Walt cancelled this project as well, and with no concrete reason. Some Imagineers said it could have been because a transparent candy mountain would be difficult to clean. I also read one article that said Walt said that people would feel sick to look at a giant mountain made of candy. Who knows for sure, but either way, another Oz project was cancelled, and in its place, Disney Imagineers conceived and built another non-candy mountain, which we all know and love today as Disneyland's favorite basketball court, aka the Matterhorn. Now, there's been a lot of speculation over the years as to why Walt all of a sudden canceled not one but two Oz projects, especially when it seemed to be a passion project of his. Honestly, I think the most obvious reason is the most likely. The MGM film was too good to compete with. Now, yes, Disney did own the rights to the majority of L Frank Baum's Oz novels, but MGM still held the rights to their specific film. And by the 1950s, MGM's Wizard of Oz film was airing on television annually, so it was still very present in the public consciousness, and comparisons between MGM's Oz and whatever Disney did with Oz were inevitable. And in order for Disney to do an Oz project, they would have had to completely reimagine what the world of Oz looked like, what the world of Oz sounded like. And because they didn't have the rights to the original novel, any Oz project that Disney did essentially would have played out like a sequel to an origin story that they didn't have any legal right to create. Hashtag Return to Oz. And for a Disney Oz project to be successful, it would have had to have been as good, if not better, than the MGM film. And we all saw that Patchwork Girl.
Patches, patches.
Ugh. The other thing I suspect might have held Walt back is that he waited so long to do something with the Oz properties that L Frank Baum's books were slowly starting to be released into the public domain, ironically starting with the origin story, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. So that meant that by the 1960s, anyone and everyone could start creating their own independent Oz projects. And that is exactly what happened, which brings us to the infamous Land of Oz theme park. I say infamous because there's this long-standing rumor that the theme park is abandoned, largely because in 2015 a photographer trespassed onto the property, snapped a bunch of illegal, albeit beautiful photos, and then went viral when he posted them online and said that they were from a theme park that was abandoned. But it's not abandoned. The Land of Oz theme park is not abandoned, it's just a seasonal theme park. Granted, for the Land of Oz, seasonal means it's open like 6 days out of the year. We'll get there. The big question: why is there a Wizard of Oz theme park in North Carolina? The short answer: because of skiing. The significantly longer answer: I did a lot of research for this video. The significantly longer answer: back in the 1960s, Beech Mountain in North Carolina was being developed into a ski resort by the Carolina Caribbean Corporation, and the two brothers who were in charge of the project wanted to make sure that they could somehow develop this area into a year-round tourist attraction so that they were getting business, all year round, including the summer months, and not just in the winter when people were skiing. Designer Jack Pentis was brought on board to come up with an idea to develop some kind of summer attraction for Beech Mountain. Now, as the story goes, he was so taken in and enchanted by the natural beauty of the landscape because he said it reminded him of the Land of Oz, and thus, the Land of Oz theme park was born. Although theme park might not be the best word to describe it because the Land of Oz is really more of a walkthrough attraction than a traditional theme park. So your experience would start by visiting Dorothy's farmhouse. Now, once you were in the farmhouse, you would be escorted into the storm cellar for the Twister scene. Following the Twister scene, you'd exit the storm cellar, and now the farmhouse that you had just visited was in total shambles. And the structure apparently was built on a bit of a tilt, I think like a 15-degree tilt, to really sell the illusion that you were in a house that had been through a twister. From that point on, you would follow the yellow brick road, literally, and encounter different characters and scenes from the story. Now, I think this is a good point to remind you that the only reason that this park could exist was because L Frank Baum's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, had just entered the public domain, which meant that the creative minds behind the Land of Oz faced the same issue that Walt Disney had been struggling with for years. They had to reimagine what their Oz characters looked like, and they had to create and compose their own songs. And now, credit where credit is due, I actually really enjoy some of the character designs that they came up with. I mean, when I look at the Tin Man that they had, that automated mouth, that is an effect that I feel would still hold up today. But the thing that I find so entertaining overall about their character designs is that they were leaning into 1970s groovy aesthetic really hard. Look at Disco Dorothy. She's a queen. Anyway, after your character encounters along the yellow brick road, you would make your way to the Emerald City, aka a beautiful outdoor amphitheater where you can watch the Magic Moments show. Or as I like to think of it, the Magic Mushroom show, because there were literally magic mushrooms. It's like mushrooms that had faces, and I'm assuming they sang and danced. I don't know. It's 1970s, right? Now, I couldn't exactly tell you what happened in the Magic Moments show, but the vibe that I'm getting is that it was a bit of a recreation of the wizard giving everyone their gifts, and the big finale, apparently, was Dorothy disappearing on stage and then reappearing behind the audience in a hot air balloon. Which brings me to the park's one and only ride, the hot air balloons. So they modified a ski lift so that instead of ski lift chairs, you had a beautiful but also structurally unsound looking balloon basket that you could ride in, and it would give you a beautiful bird's eye view of the landscape of North Carolina, of Oz. And speaking of the beautiful landscape, I actually think that's the greatest thing about the Land of Oz theme park. The entire inspiration behind it came from how stunning the natural beauty of Beech Mountain was. And as I understand it, the mandate or the rule when constructing the park was that they couldn't disturb any of the nature. So everything had to be built into natural clearings that were already there, and in the entirety of construction, I think they only cut down one tree. But honestly, I think the greatest thing about the park and the most beautiful thing that the park has to offer is a full-scale, legitimate yellow brick road. Can you just imagine seeing a legitimate yellow brick road with the backdrop of all of that natural Beech Mountain beauty? Chef's kiss. The yellow brick road was apparently constructed using 44,000 hand-painted yellow bricks, and to this day, the yellow brick road continues to get a fresh coat of paint every year. And one of the genius things about the Land of Oz theme park is how they managed to ride the coattails of the MGM film's popularity while still being a public domain Oz park. So for example, they had Ray Bolger in attendance as like the guest of honor for the groundbreaking ceremony when they first started building the park. They had an observation deck, I think it's actually still there, which they named after Judy Garland. And one of the coolest features when the park first opened was a Wizard of Oz museum, which featured props and costumes from MGM's film, including one of Judy Garland's Dorothy dresses. Yeah. Now you might be thinking, how the bleep did they manage that? Well, let me tell you. I've spoken about the great MGM prop and costume auction on the channel a bunch before, but in a nutshell, In 1970, MGM decided to auction off all of their stuff, and Debbie Reynolds bought almost all of it. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but if you really want the details, I'd say go watch my Debbie Reynolds video or go watch my Ruby Slippers video. But basically, in 1970, MGM decided that they were going to have a massive auction to try to clear out some warehouse space, and they sold off all of their props and costumes from past productions. Debbie Reynolds was in attendance, but you know who else was in attendance? One of the developers from the Land of Oz theme park. Now, he went there with the intention of scoring as much Oz memorabilia as he possibly could to display at the park. But here's the thing. He had a budget of only $25,000, and he had to compete against Debbie Reynolds. Apparently, he struck up a deal with Debbie. If she didn't outbid him on certain items or drive up the price, he would lend her those items so that she could display them in her own movie memorabilia museum that she was hoping to eventually open. And through that deal, he was able to secure a lot of stuff, including costumes from background performers from Munchkinland as well as the Emerald City, as well as pieces from the Wicked Witch, Tin Man, the Lion, and of course, one of Dorothy's dresses. But aside from the memorabilia, the other big takeaway from the MGM auction was that now Land of Oz had an established relationship with Debbie Reynolds, and she was invited as the guest of honor, and she even cut the ribbon on the park's opening day, June 15th, 1970. The park ran pretty successfully for a few years, but then in 1975, someone mysteriously set fire to the Emerald City Amphitheater, and the park's museum was broken into. All of the costumes were stolen, including Dorothy's dress. And as far as I know, to this day, the whereabouts of that specific dress are still unknown. Between the fire, plus the decline in tourism due to the 1970s oil crisis, the park struggled to rebuild and eventually closed its doors in 1980. But in the 1990s, the park started to reopen on select dates. It originally started just as a reunion for some of the park's original cast members, or rather, original employees, but that effectively started a Land of Oz renaissance of sorts. It snowballed into becoming this annual event that still runs to this day called the Autumn at Oz Festival, which is one of the world's biggest Wizard of Oz festivals. Essentially, the Land of Oz reopens and you can have the full Land of Oz experience as it was back in its heyday. You can explore the park, you can have character interactions, and the event gets bigger and bigger every year. They add new songs, they add new scenes, they add new musical numbers, and the big difference is that now the character designs as well as the songs and the scenes are lifted directly from the MGM film. Don't ask me how that's legally possible because I looked into it and I honestly can't find an answer. But you know what? When the Instagram-worthy photo ops are this good, I'm not going to be the one to tell Warner Brothers. Anyway, with their Autumn at Oz festival continuing to run to this day, I'm pretty sure that makes Land of Oz one of, if not the longest-running Wizard of Oz themed attractions in history. But now let's turn our attention to one of the shortest-running Wizard of Oz themed attractions in history. Does anyone else remember the 90s? Oh, the 90s. It was such a magical time. It gave us the Disney Renaissance, but you know what else it gave us? The Wizard of Oz Renaissance. If you want to know why I am the way that I am, it's because I grew up with both the Disney and Oz Renaissance, like shaping my childhood. And now here we are, 30 some odd years later, and there's a YouTube channel. MGM's Wizard of Oz film really started to trend again around the late 80s, early 90s, and in no way did I do the research to back up this claim, but I'm going to say that it's because of the introduction of the VHS player coinciding with the film's 50th anniversary in 1989. Because now, all of a sudden, those generations that grew up watching the Wizard of Oz on TV were having kids of their own, and they were able to introduce this film to their kids in color on demand. Seriously, let's not sleep on how bleepin' amazing VHS is. But anyway, yeah, I think the powers that be realized that there were nostalgia dollars to be made off of the Wizard of Oz. And, fun fact, my first memory as a human on this earth was attending the Wizard of Oz's 50th anniversary celebration at Macy's department store in New York City, but we're not talking about that. We are talking about a gone before its time Wizard of Oz animatronic spectacular.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too!
No, not that one. Yes, we all know that in 1989, Disney opened up its third gate in Florida, Disney's MGM Studios, and the park's signature attraction, the Great Movie Ride, had an epic Wizard of Oz finale. Yes, we all know that there was supposed to be a Twister scene as part of the Great Movie Ride, but legally that couldn't happen, and so it became a Fantasia scene instead. Yes, we all know that the Wicked Witch of the West animatronic was a big deal. I even own a limited edition pin that features a piece of the animatronic's green flesh. And if you don't know any of that, I recommend you go back and watch my Great Movie Ride Marathon series. It was so much fun. But for a few years, Disney's MGM Studios was not the only place where you could go to see Wizard of Oz animatronics. I know that's extremely niche, but it's true. Let's for a moment pay homage and memory to the other MGM attraction that came out of the 90s. I am of course referring to Las Vegas's one and only MGM Grand Hotel. Now, you might have even heard of the MGM Grand Hotel. It's still there. In fact, according to my labor-intensive Wikipedia research, it remains the largest single hotel in the entire world. So the MGM Grand opened up on the Las Vegas Strip in December of 1993. And this is the thing about the hotels that were opening up in the 90s on the Las Vegas Strip. It's like they all took a piece of advice from those strippers in Gypsy.
You gotta get a gimmick!
All of the hotels that were opening up at that time had some kind of theme, some kind of gimmick. There was the Paris Hotel, there was the Medieval Hotel, there was the New York Hotel, there was the problematic Ancient Egyptian Hotel. Well, when it first opened, the MGM Grand, more or less, was the Wizard of Oz Hotel. And not to toot my own horn, but I am pretty damn lucky because it wasn't there for very long, and I got to experience it 3 times. Kind of 2.5. We'll get to that part of the story. It's very sad. Now, if you look at the MGM Grand today, it's not super obvious that when it opened, it was very heavily themed to the Wizard of Oz, because now they really don't have a gimmick aside from elitism. Like, they've just gone super classy with the hotel. But there are still some clues. The main one being the fact that the hotel was constructed to literally look like a giant, glistening Emerald City. It's a beautiful emerald green that still stands out on the Vegas Strip. But for the first 3 years of operation, the Oz theming continued inside the building. And this is super significant because it was the first and to date only time in history that we saw Disney-level themed attractions based on MGM's Wizard of Oz film. There were Oz-themed restaurants like the Oz Buffet, which was, to be fair, just like a pretty standard Vegas buffet, but the decor was all Wizard of Oz, with the main attraction being this gorgeous hand-painted Wizard of Oz mural just along the back wall of the main dining area. When you first entered the lobby, you were greeted by the Emerald City Gift Shop, which was a store that only sold Wizard of Oz items, and there was something there for the entire family. There was expensive, exclusive stuff for the adult Oz collectors, like we're talking real haughty, corduroy stuff. Then there were Wizard of Oz toys for kids, and looking back, I don't know why this is what I was the most engaged by, but the thing I found most exciting was that they had VHS copies of the original 1920s Wizard of Oz silent films. I don't know why as a kid that appealed to me, but it did, and that was like the main thing I got from the Wizard of Oz gift shop. Oh, one of the other things I got from the Wizard of Oz gift shop was this director chair, and it had Dorothy embroidered on the back. And the really special thing about the Emerald City gift shop is that as a regular celebrity guest, they had Roger S. Baum in attendance, who was either the grandson or the great-grandson of L Frank Baum, the guy who created the Wizard of Oz. And he would regularly be there at the Emerald City gift shop doing signings of his latest book. I met him like 2 or 3 times. It was so cool. When you got into the actual casino, the gaming floor as well was all Oz themed. I think it was called like the Emerald City Casino. Some of the carpets had rainbows on them, other carpets had poppies on them. There was an entire bank of slot machines that was constructed around a spinning Glinda animatronic. But the rule, if you were a kid, was that if you were on the gaming floor, you had to be in constant motion, because like the gaming floor, the way that this hotel was built was that to get from one side of the hotel to the other, like where the restaurants were, you had to walk through the casino. So as a kid, I had to walk through the casino to get to the food court, but I had to be in constant motion, and the security guard yelled at me and my parents multiple times because I stopped just to look at the spinning Glinda animatronic. But you know what? It's just as well, because you know what's even better than spinning animatronics beckoning you to play the slot machines? Face characters. They had Wizard of Oz face characters that you could interact with. You could meet Dorothy, Scarecrow, Tin Man, and lion. You could take pictures with them. It was like being at Disney World. And they took it one step above and beyond, because those face characters on occasion would also come and interact with the kids in the hotel's kids club. I have a distinct memory of coloring with the Cowardly Lion. It was so much fun. But the hotel's signature attraction was in the lobby, and it was a life-sized Emerald City. The Emerald City was built under this domed ceiling, and the ceiling featured projection effects that made it look like the night sky. So they were able to create things like thunderstorms, twisters, a rainbow, and every few minutes the Wicked Witch of the West would fly by. And I might be fabricating this memory, but I'm pretty sure they used lasers to spell out Surrender Dorothy whenever that happened. On one side of the Emerald City, there were statues of all the main characters. So there was Dorothy, Scarecrow, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion, and Toto too. And sidebar, I actually discovered while researching for this video that there was one point in time where the Toto statue was actually kidnapped from the hotel, brought to Canada, and then held for ransom, which the hotel allegedly paid.
A ransom note that says, "Step aside, OJ, we've got Toto." And it says, "Don't bother clicking your heels."
Teasing pictures show Toto in Canada. His abductors agreed to be interviewed in subtle disguise.
Never seen Vancouver before, though, huh?
With News 3 as an intermediary, Toto was returned at night on a pedestrian bridge. The next day, MGM sent an Emerald limo to pick up the dog.
And as an Oz-loving Canadian, I plead the fifth on that story. Moving on. On the other side of the Emerald City, there was a yellow brick road walking path where you could encounter animatronics of all the characters. So the wizard was up in his balloon, and all of these animatronics had pretty good motion, and they were all talking. Now, I'm sure they weren't nearly as intricate as what we saw in the Great Movie Ride at Disney World, but aesthetically, they held up pretty darn well. So there was Dorothy talking to one of the apple trees. You could see the Scarecrow in the cornfield. The Wicked Witch of the West was like lurking, and she was holding a crystal ball. The Tin Man and the Cowardly Lion were having a fight. Really, the only character that wasn't there was Glinda, because her animatronic was in the casino encouraging kids to gamble. But the fun didn't stop at the walking path, because yes, you could actually go inside the Emerald City. And inside the Emerald City was a magic show called The Wizard's Secrets. Now, admittedly, the magic show had little to nothing to do with The Wizard of Oz. It was just kind of a standard Vegas magic show. I don't even want to say standard Vegas magic show, because like their standard is literally David Copperfield. But it was just like a cool parlor trick magic show, but the space was so beautiful. It was so eerie. It was this like intimate, tiny space that just felt like an old-timey 1800s magic parlor. Kind of similar to, I guess, what they're going for with the Abracadabra bar in Disney World. And the magic show itself was pretty entertaining. I mean, I probably saw it 3 or 4 times, and it did get to the point where I figured out how all the tricks were done. But it wasn't so much about the magic of the tricks, it was about the magic of the atmosphere. I know how it sounds, but it was really cool. Now, sadly, this amazing Wizard of Oz theming did not last very long, and it was all torn down in 1996. 1996. Just take a minute to realize what that means. The hotel opened at the end of 93. Like, all of this amazing Wizard of Oz stuff was there for barely 2.5 years before they destroyed it and took it down. Like, just to put that into perspective, that would be like if Disney all of a sudden decided to close Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway tomorrow and bulldoze the beautiful theater that it's in. And it's not like they just closed down a store. It's not like they shut down the Emerald City gift shop. They got rid of the Emerald City itself. The centerpiece of the hotel's flippin' lobby, the heart and soul of this entire resort was gone. And it only lasted like 2.5 years. And you know what? Because there was no social media at the time, you know how little Matt found out that the most magical place in the world after Disney World was destroyed? I didn't know in advance. I knew because on my family vacation, we got to the MGM Grand and I ran to see the Emerald City, and instead I saw construction walls. I think I cried. Not even think. I know I cried. And to soften the blow, the hotel employees gave us, like, an upgrade to a Wizard of Oz suite. It wasn't really anything special. It was just a room that had a picture of the Tin Man in it. There's a picture probably somewhere. Now, I'm not sure why it was torn down so quickly, and I have done the research and I can't find any reason. So if anyone does know, I would love to hear from you. But the best thing that I can think of is that it was an early casualty of Vegas's failed attempt to become a family tourist destination. Because there was a very brief period in the 90s where Vegas was trying to rebrand themselves to be a tourist destination for families. So kind of in the same way that Disney and Universal were drawing people to either Florida or California, I think they were hoping that offering this kind of theming would bring families to Las Vegas. But for various reasons, that failed, and I think the Emerald City was one of the first indications that it didn't work. But you know what? At least it got made. Which is more than we can say for the wonderful World of Oz theme park. Oh, you beautiful idiot. You didn't even get a chance. Once upon a time, there was an epic Wizard of Oz theme park that was devised and created by some of the top tier masterminds in the theme park industry. A theme park that Harrison Buzz Price, the famous economist who advised Walt while creating Disneyland, said was the best theme park pitch he had ever seen since Disneyland. A theme park that was never built. But I am realizing now that the wonderful World of Oz was such an incredible concept, and it was so wonderful that it deserves a video unto itself. So I am splitting this video into two parts. So stay tuned for the History of Wizard of Oz Theme Parks Part 2, where we will be doing a virtual visit to the wonderful World of Oz. And if you want to know when that video drops, make sure you subscribe to the channel. But for now, friends, this concludes yet another episode of Teacup for One. My name is Matt, and I have 2 degrees, and this has been the Tea Cup for One. Justice for Wonderful World of Oz. Join me for Part 2.